All right, so let's get started. Welcome to Private Cloud Made Simple, or the ultimate session about the Private Cloud Reference Architecture program at Microsoft. My name is Michael Schulz. I'm a product marketing manager in the Cloud and Enterprise organization. And my partner in crime today is Ian Lucas, principal program manager, also in Cloud and Enterprise. So before I start, I would like to get a good idea of who am I talking to. So who has deployed a private cloud today successfully in their enterprise? Oh, quite a few, fair enough. Who's interested in doing that and also deploying that or taking it further into a hybrid environment? Very good. Do we have any system integrators here? No system integrators. Oh, well, okay. Quite a few at least. And the most important question of all, who are the most awesome guitar players and drummers for tonight's jam session? Perfect. So we will have some fun. That's great. So before we start, let me talk about a little bit about the Microsoft Cloud OS vision and what we mean when we talk about cloud. So there are basically three pillars to that vision. So we start with the private cloud. Yes, and some of you have deployed it already. So it starts Windows Server, System Center. When we say private cloud, and a lot of people oftentimes say, well, I have virtualization, so I have cloud, right? It's the same. And it's not. It's really not. Virtualization is great. It became quite popular back in the day. Server consolidation. People had the problem, they had servers galore. And then they ran into these problems. Well, I don't have the space anymore. I don't have power, and cooling costs me an arm and a leg. So what do I do? And they start to virtualize, and that's great. That's for virtualization or server consolidation. It's a great tool, but it's not really cloud. It's when we talk about cloud, what we really mean is delivering services, not just a VM. Because if you think about it, virtualization is, yes, you virtualize a physical machine, but at the end of the day, you still have a server instance, a server entity that you have to deal with, that you have to administer. And what we really want to do is take that to the next level, where you can say, well, I just want to deliver a service. Have a user come to you or a business unit and say, well, I need SharePoint, I need a SQL database. And, well, not even have to come to you, but do that for themselves, let's say through a portal, right? And so when we talk about cloud, what we mean is, our cloud is requestable, it's repeatable, it's available, obviously, that's a key part. It's chargeable, so that when we think about it, how can you, if you deliver that inside your organization to that business unit, when they say, well, we need this service, how can you make sure that you have proper reporting in place, for example, to charge them for the capacity they consume? And we have the public cloud. We have software as a service with Office 365. Any Office 365 users here? Quite a few, right? Public platform as a service with Microsoft Azure that we deliver there. Then obviously infrastructure as a service through virtual machines in Microsoft Azure. So you can still spin up a VM there and move that workload into the public cloud. So when we talk about the private cloud, what it really is about control, right? It's about on-premise, behind your firewall, you have the control of the environment. When we talk about the public cloud, what it really is about scale. Yes, you can spin up that VM, and you can spin it up, let's say, in a data center here on the West Coast in the US, or you can spin it up in a data center in Europe, in Asia, Africa, or you can even move it around, right? So it's about scale. If you have the need to scale a service, for example, around the globe, that's where the public cloud really comes in, where you really have a benefit from that. And then we have the service providers. So we work with a lot of service providers that are offering the same architecture, the same platform to their customers. And where that really helps is, for example, if you are in another country than, in this case, Microsoft. Let's say, so I'm from Germany. And if you're in Germany, you say, well, I need to make sure, yes, I want a cloud service delivered, but I need to make sure that my data, my service is on German soils. I have to deal with a German entity, with a German company, for whatever the reason may be it regulatory, be it other reasons. I want to make sure that I have that in my country. Or this service provider can deliver me a more customized service that I want. Different SLAs that, for example, would not be possible in a public cloud. So we have those partners as well. And the key here is that across these three pillars, across these three tenets, what we want to make sure is that we deliver you one consistent platform. Okay? So it's based on Windows Server, System Center, and we give you something else. We give you, who has heard, I hope all of you by now, about the Windows Azure Pack? There could be more hands. Okay. So if not, that's really something you want to check out, because what that allows you or gives you then for your on-premise private cloud and for the service provider cloud, it gives you the same interface, the same environment that your users expect or see in Microsoft Azure. So you have the consistency across these three pillars. But we go beyond that, right? So development, we give you Visual Studio so that you have the development environment right there where you can develop the application, deploy it directly into the cloud. Management with System Center, again, a consistent and unified platform. The same interface to manage your services on the private cloud or, for example, in the Azure cloud. Data, a SQL Server, you can spin that up in a VM in your cloud or delivered as a service. So Azure Pack gives you the ability so that you have a portal and at the back end it has the providers that in the back end, you stand up a SQL Server farm, and then if your users, the business unit, I don't know, sales, they require another database, their developers can just go to that portal, request a database based on their requirements, and IT doesn't have to deal with that anymore. They don't have to go and find a machine or spin up a VM and deploy SQL Server. Identity. Active Directory, probably the most used directory service in the enterprise today. So spans also all these clouds. And finally, virtualization. It's a tenet of the cloud, of course, but not the only thing. The other thing when we talk to customers, and there's this difference between the on-premise cloud and the public cloud. And there are two types. There are enterprises that are acting as service providers, and then there are those that don't know yet that they want to. So what that means is basically they say, well, I want all these. I want to deliver this service. I want to have this elasticity. I want to have this chargeback or showback. But I'm not a service provider. Yes, you are. Just that you are a service provider to your internal users, to your internal entities, not to the world, but within your enterprise. But the concept starts to become the same. You are delivering a service when you think about the private cloud. Okay? That's really where this helps, that then users can self-service themselves with the required service they need. So some common questions that we hear are, how can I get a private cloud deployed quickly? How can I save time doing so? How can I reduce risk when going down that path of going, I want that cloud? Anybody wants to do that themselves? Yes? No? Okay. And also how to leverage. If you have a partner, a strategic relationship, for example, with a certain hardware partner, and insert your favorite hardware partner here, then how can you leverage that? Is that possible? So that's what we have. We came up with this program, a Private Cloud Fast Track, the reference architecture program, where Microsoft partners with OEM partners to build, not only define a reference architecture, but then based on that, build integrated solutions, software and hardware combined, and hardware being compute, networking, and storage. Okay, so that you have the best of both worlds. So in terms of, what's the right solution? Again, there are those who want to do it all themselves. Pick the network controllers, the HBA, storage, which server to use, and figure that all out and do it from scratch. Great. Problem is, it can take a long time, and there's no pre-integration. There's a high level of customization, of course, but it may not be that necessary anymore. Then there is the other end, using a service provider, but that's something we also say, maybe I want that on-premise. I do not want that in the cloud. So there's a middle ground, if you so, right? And that's the private cloud fast-track solutions. So we can take out that hassle. And that's really where we put a lot of effort in, both Microsoft and our hardware partners, because we want to make sure that when you go down that path of deploying that private cloud on-premise, we want to make sure that, the customer or the user experience is as positive as possible. So that we make sure we pre-tested, we validated the solution, that it really works. So we take a lot of the guesswork, a lot of the research and experimenting out, so that we can say, well, this solution, this hardware stack, together with the various Microsoft software components, we Microsoft, we tested that, okay? And we can guarantee it works. We validated it. And it comes down to then the time to value is a term we often hear these days. Is how quick can I turn this around? I have a project. I have this project cycle. I need to get this up quick. How soon can you do that? And then again, the flexibility in working with these various partners. So faster deployment, reducing the risk, and also through the use of Microsoft technologies like software-defined networking technologies, like software-defined storage, software-defined networking, also at the same time lowering the total cost of ownership. So what is Private Cloud Fast Track? It offers a high level of pre-integration and low deployment time. So it's a reference architecture. Give you end-to-end deployment guides. So you do not have to go through TechNet, through all the various documentations and figure out how do I install SCVMM, and then on top of that, OC plus Azure Pack, and all. We give you all that in a deployment guide, step by step. Once we build these solutions with these partners, we validate them against our software portfolio. Not only do we make sure that obviously Windows Server and all these components run, but for example, that failover clustering works. Some, live migration, Hyper-V live migration, that works, really works. Not just, on paper it looks good, but does it really work in real world? Turnkey options, and that's the other thing, when we talk about time to value, how can we make sure that when you say, well, I want this quick, I want this fast, that you don't have to wait a couple of weeks before the hardware comes in, then you start deploying it, and before you're done, well, 3 months have turned. And I mentioned before, end-to-end integrated, so compute, networking, storage, and of course software on top, not just a bag of parts. So for system integrators, where this becomes interesting is that it is something additional that you can deliver to your customers. When you go to your customers and offer a private cloud solution, you can say, look, I'm bringing you this Microsoft validated architecture together with the respective OEM partner that you customer pick. You can leverage those blueprints, those deployment guides, again, to create some confidence with your customers when you say, well, I'm using something that Microsoft developed, and they verify and they validate, and we, Microsoft, stand behind that, right? So what goes into building a solution? So first of all, we have 3 patterns, and Ian will talk about them in detail later. So where the OEM comes to us and chooses which pattern they want to build against, and then they formulate the solution. Then we review that solution together with the OEM partner and build a checklist. Okay, here are the things that we need to test in order to validate, to make sure this really works. Okay, then the OEM builds the solution, and we run some validation tests. For example, basic tests like cluster failover. Does that really work? We pull the plug. We see if it works. So it's not just a theoretical test, okay? And then finally, once the solution is built, then we really put it through its paces. Okay, so we sit down with the partner in the data center, okay, and we run stress tests. We put load on it. It's great if it's working in the demo mode, but what if we put really high load on the solution? Does that really withstand that? What happens if we pull a network cable, if we pull a power cord? Does it really fail over? Does it continue to work? Is the service still available? So we start at the validation process. We start with the min bar is the Windows hardware certification. So if the hardware is not certified for vehicle, then we don't even need to continue further down the path. So it has to meet that minimum criteria. And then on top of that, then we build further, right? So then we make sure cluster failover clustering works. Not just, oh yeah, we installed the software and in theory it works, but no, it really has to work if something goes wrong. And then based on the pattern they picked, then we have other criteria that we validate against. And we have mandatory, recommended, and optional criteria. So mandatory criteria are really, this is something that has to be in the solution, otherwise we cannot call it a fast-track validated solution. Okay, then we have the recommended ones where we say, this is really best practices that you should put in in order to deliver the best experience. And then optional ones, they're nice to have, but they're not really critical to the solution. So just a few samples. They're not all of them, and again, they're based on the pattern chosen by the OEM. So at a minimum, I mentioned failover clustering, so that means, of course, we have to at least have 2 nodes. So that's the minimum configuration for this solution. It has to have redundant power supplies. Hard to not have that these days, but that's just standard stuff where we say, well, in order to have this reliability, this redundancy, and this availability, those are things that we really have to have. And then on top of that, it has to support certain software features. Mobility of virtual machines, Hyper-V live migration, storage migration, all these features that we really need in the cloud, no matter if it's a public cloud or a private cloud, right? Those have to be met. Those have to work in that solution. And then we have some recommended criteria. Let's say, for example, if you're building something for a branch office, let's say, where the access controls are not as stringent as in an enterprise data center, it might be a good idea to, for example, implement encryption for data at rest. Standardized VM deployment. With System Center, you now have the service templates, the gallery. So you can standardize if you want to deploy a solution stack, let's say a SQL Server solution, that you can standardize, this is what this looks like, and have that repeatable, so that when a tenant, when a user requests a SQL Server, that they always get the same. So there's no variation, which makes it much easier later to troubleshoot, for example. And then finally, one thing that we added in the new version is the Windows Azure Pack, so that we can say, hey, if you want to deliver a private cloud to your users, Azure Pack really is the solution to do so, not just to have, okay, we have virtualization, but again, it's not really cloud, but have all the other features as well, so that you have a tenant portal. Azure Pack gives you that admin portal, so that you have all these other features, like, for example, the chargeback, showback, and the service gallery for those users. And then we have some optional criteria that are not really critical. For example, Hyper-V application monitoring, if the application itself is not cluster aware, resource metering that comes back into the service reporting, the chargeback, or, for example, SSDs for performance. But it's not really that critical for the solution. So before we look into what's new in the version 4, so that's where we are today, Fast Track version 4, which was released in February early this year. I want to take a quick step back to last year when we were at the previous version. And basically, if you look at the versions of the reference architecture, they basically reflect they're connected to the current, the version of the Windows Server and System Center releases. So last year was really a big step or a really big update in the reference architecture when we went from Windows Server and System Center 2008 R2 to Windows Server and System Center 2012, which brought a lot new features that are really relevant when building a cloud to the table. Storage spaces, SMB 3.0 when we talk about the software-defined storage and software-defined data center. The capability in System Center that the System Center VMM can be made highly available is a key feature. The entire fabric management for the cloud, but also, for example, in the previous version, we increased the size of the architecture from 16 prior to now 64 physical hosts. And we were just doing the math. If you think about it, 64 hosts may not sound a lot at first, but if you put 64 hosts, even if at a 2-socket server, 8-core CPUs, that's a lot of capacity, right? So that's the current where we are with 64 hosts in total. So Private Cloud Fast Track version 4, we then did the upgrade again, updated the architecture to Windows Server and System Center 2012 R2. And again, new features came with those releases, and I'm not listing all of them, otherwise we would probably miss the jam session tonight because there are quite a lot. But again, some that are relevant when thinking about building a cloud in particular. Shared VHDX file, so you can now build a guest cluster in the cloud, so you become to have the shared storage. Hyper-V live migration over SMB. Again, when we talk about a software-defined data center, how can we make that better? The template gallery, again, for the repeatability of deployments. That's really a key feature. And we integrated or included the Windows Azure Pack as a recommended feature. When we look at the architecture guide, so it's basically split in two. It's the Fabric architecture guide, and then it's the Fabric management guide. So we also included now a scenario for the hybrid cloud. That's what I was asking earlier. Who's looking at hybrid cloud scenarios? So we built this into the deployment guide as well. I mentioned the Windows Azure Pack, and that in combination then with the Service Provider Foundation, service reporting, and the service management automation. That really gives you that repeatability, that requestability of services from those users, where you then can make it easy for the user to request a certain, let's say, I need a SharePoint site, I need it this size, and you can have that over and over and over delivered. So let's talk about, or let's look about more into the actual architecture of, or the three patterns that we offer in this program. So let me turn it over to Ian, who will give you a bit more insight into that.
Thanks, Michael. Are we on? I think we're on. Are we on? Can you hear me? Sure? Okay. When Michael and I were working out the timing for this session, he promised me that he would hand over to me at about the 30-minute mark, and that 70% or more of you would still be awake. And he's done a really good job on the time, which is fantastic. And I heard one laugh, so we've got sort of 5% of us awake. Okay, let's see if we can change that. My name is Ian Lucas. I'm a program manager inside of the Windows Server organization. My regular day job, or part of my regular day job, is around developing inbox management tools, things like Server Manager and some of those, working with some of the tools, the teams like the Spaces guys and the IPAM guys on inbox tools. But I recently picked up the Private Cloud Fast Track program, which is a joint program between the product groups, our marketing organization, our partner organizations, to work with partners around building great private cloud solutions for you. Okay, so what I want to do today, I don't know if anyone's here came hoping to get a really level 4, level 500 drill down into cloud architecture. That's not the intent today. We leveled the session at 200 level on purpose. But what I do want to do is give you an insight into what we try and achieve in the architectural side of the Private Cloud Fast Track program, what our goals are there, and to hopefully have you leave with an appreciation of how deep that is and just how valuable that is from a customer perspective when you go talk to our partners about their solutions and understand just what level of thinking has gone, what level of due diligence has gone into the design thinking behind their solutions. Because it really does go very deep, and we'll only really be able to scratch the surface here. So let's talk a little bit about what a private cloud looks like. Very simple diagram. We're not even at level 100 yet, right? But basically, you're going to have compute, network, storage resources. These are going to be hardware resources which you bring into your private cloud solution. On top of that, you're going to lay a Windows Server, and inside of Windows Server, you are going to have all of the technologies which allow you to connect to those physical resources, to your compute, to your network, and to your storage. On top of that, then you're going to lay a System Center, which allows you to manage those. And then right on top of this, I've then put Windows Azure Pack, which is now talking about how to offer off services in a private cloud sort of way. So if you look at this, you can think of the bottom half of this as being the fabric. Okay, you can have a cloud fabric with just Windows Server. You don't need System Center to have a fabric. All of the fabric really lives inside of the server layer. But in order to be able to manage that and operate it as a cloud, as a fabric, you really need to sort of put a fabric management layer on top of that. Okay, so this is at a very, very simple level, the way that you'll see the private cloud architecture structured. Michael was telling you that we have sort of two architectural documents. One is the fabric architecture, and then there's the fabric management architecture. We'll talk a little bit about both of those. And both of those documents, which are really thick documents, are available to you if you want to go have a look at those online. We'll show you where to get those. So let's talk a little bit about what's really interesting here. And what I want to talk about are some of the architectural principles which underpin what's inside of those architectural documents. Okay, and these are themes which you'll see through those documents because these things are important. In this sort of cloud environment, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to pool the physical resources. Okay, so At a very simple level, we want to take all the compute resources, we want to pool them together. All the storage resources, pull them together. And where possible, the network resources, and pull them together. We want to aggregate those together so we can slice and dice them up in different ways so you can use them in different ways from a single common pool. Okay, that's fundamentally what you're trying to do inside of the fabric. Now, when you do that, there's a couple of characteristics which you're really trying to achieve. Okay, first one is you want to be able to pull from those pools in an elastic way. So you want to be able to, based on what your need is, allocate resources out of that pool based on your need and then adapt those or change them, grow them or shrink them based on what you need. Makes sense. You want to make those continuously available. So you want to make sure that they are resilient to failures in any component. You want to make sure that if there's servicing that you need to do in your environment, that you can do that, you can keep resources available through that servicing process, the patching process. So continuous availability is a big fundamental principle which you'll see a lot of the architecture docs talking about. How do you configure these so that you can achieve HA? Predictability. So some of you might be saying, isn't that the same as highly available? Well, maybe, but that's not really what I mean here. What I'm talking about when I say predictable is if I'm a workload on top of this fabric, I want to be able to consume resources in a predictable way from a performance perspective. Okay? So if you think about running multiple workloads on a single server, you have an inherent cross-dependency between them because they're sharing resources. But as we move to a cloud operation model, a private cloud operation model, what you want to do is you want to start offering from that pool of resources an SLA around those resources so that any workload on top can have a level of predictability around how they consume those and therefore how they perform as a workload. So this predictability is one of the themes that you'll see through the docs. And then finally, security. So I've been at Microsoft about 10 years now, and I've got to tell you, security is part of every single engineering conversation that we have. It's part of the Microsoft DNA now, and we can't go through anything without thinking about, how do we think about this from a threat model perspective? What are the right configuration defaults to have based on how a customer is going to deploy this to make sure they're secure from day one? Okay, so security is very much part of what you'll see through the doc as well. So once we have the fabric part sort of sorted out, and we'll dive into a little bit more of that in a little bit. Then there's well, how do I actually then operate this as a private cloud model? Pardon me. So what we wanted to be able to do is we want to offer off this fabric in a multi-tenant way. Now, you might say, but I'm not really going to be a service provider, so do I really have to do this multi-tenancy? And, well, I want to suggest to you that what you really want to do is inside of your own organization, you want to treat different sub-areas of your organization, maybe different subdivisions or different functional units, as a tenant. Okay? You want to treat them as a tenant who is consuming resources on a usage-based model. And then maybe you even want to extend to them a self-service ability, just as if they're using a public cloud, so they have the same model when they come and use your private resources, private cloud resources, as they would have in a public cloud. So you're sort of operating as an internal service provider. And then finally, across all of these, you'll see this principle play out around partner extensibility. The Private Cloud Fast Track program is very much a partner program which is aimed at saying, how do we get a lot of really great solutions in the marketplace at different design points? Okay? And in order to do that, and in order for those solutions to be robust, we're very dependent upon our partners being able to extend those at all different layers. Okay, so you might look at this list and say, okay, maybe we're a little over level 100 now, but it's still sort of hand-wavy. Okay, and I think you'd be right. But this is just a set of themes. So any one of these themes we can then drill down into and get to the real meat of what the architecture docs will cover. Let's take, for example, the continuous availability or redundancy, resiliency. So what you'll see here is, let's start at the bottom, how deep that theme repeats all the way through as you think about the design of a private cloud system. All the way down to the hardware level, where we're looking at how you plan for hardware faults and error architecture, going up around planning for migration for planned downtime, failover cluster for unplanned downtime, up to the I/O redundancy level, where you're thinking about storage multipath, multi-channel SMB, if that's the path you're taking, network load balancing, all this sort of stuff. And you continue all the way up to sort of the disaster recovery level thinking about scenarios where you're doing DR. Okay? So all the way through the architecture, you take that theme and you think about it at every single level going up. How does this solution behave? And then how do we deliver on that promise at the above? So hopefully that gives you an idea of sort of the depth that we go into across these architectural principles. Okay. So inside of the Private Cloud Fast Track program, as I just said, one of our goals is to make sure that in the market there are a diverse set of solutions. We want to have a wide range of solutions and leverage our partners to be able to do that. That's really important from a Microsoft perspective. So what you'll see in the Fast Track program are really two categories of solutions. There's a small category, and this is really targeted at small, medium businesses, maybe branch offices, where you have 2, 4, or 6 hosts just providing storage and compute power in a reliable way. Okay? So in the architectural docs, you'll see this named as the SMB solution. Then, as we go to what we call the medium solution, or in the docs, an open solution, we're really looking at something larger. This is more the full rack, compute, storage power, converged system, where we're focusing at an enterprise so you can just roll it in and offer a sort of private cloud, a large VM load on top of that. When you think about what those solutions then mean, on the small side, we're talking about a set of stuff called cluster in a box, which I'm going to look at in the very next slide. Then there's also a design pattern there around clustered NAS SAN sort of design. And then on the Fast Track medium, we're talking about things like, are we using storage spaces, scale-out file servers? Are we using a SAN? Are we using converged or non-converged network infrastructure? Are we, to what extent are we software defining the stack? Okay, that's sort of on the other end. And then with doing this, what our partners have, they have a broad set of choices. And you'll see a set of solutions which hit different points and different configurations so that you have choice as you go look at those solutions across our partners. Okay, so let's look at the small side first. Cluster in a box. How many people have seen a cluster in the box solution? A fair few. If you go out to the expo, you'll see quite a number of them out there. Some of them are Fast Track validated, some of them are not, but that's okay. Basically, there's 4 things we're trying to achieve with this, and this is a fantastic program. It's a couple of years old now. I was lucky that when I looked at these themes, they spelt out an appropriate 4-letter word, not an inappropriate 4-letter word. So we start with simplicity. Okay? These solutions are not solutions where we tell you to go out and buy a set of storage and a set of compute nodes, and this is how you wire them together, and this is how you install them. The firmware should be this, and blah, blah, blah. No, these are prepackaged appliance-like solutions which you bring in. The idea being that you place them, you set them, you forget them. Okay? So that means that all of the internals is all pre-wired, all the nodes, controller, storage is all there, pre-configured, ready to go. Availability. The goal here is to make sure that regardless of any failure or replacement of any single component, that you'll still have storage and you'll still have compute. Okay? So if you look at the design example on the right-hand side of the screen there, what you will see is dual everything. And that extends down to dual power domains, dual fans, all that sort of stuff, so that if any single component fails, you're still up and running. Flexibility. With a cluster-in-a-box solution, we really expect that even though when you roll it out, it'll probably meet your needs today, that tomorrow those needs might change. So the designs usually allow for additional PCIe slots, so you can broaden the network bandwidth. They will usually have some sort of external SAS ports, so you can throw in additional JBOD expanders, all that sort of stuff, so it'll grow with you as your needs grow. If you think about that in a branch office situation, as that branch office expands, you might need to expand the storage for that branch office. And then finally, design for the environment in which they're going to be used. Because these solutions are really designed for smaller business office type environments, we wanted to push a set of principles around, let's make sure that they're designed for office level power, office level cooling, and acoustics, right? And you want them to sit underneath someone's desk and provide a capability in, again, I'll say branch office, where you want to sort of have it there, or maybe in a storage cupboard somewhere, the janitor's closet, so it'll operate there and provide what you need in that situation. So, simplicity, availability, flexity, environment. These are great solutions, and if you go out to the expo and have a bit of a wander around, you'll see some really interestingly designed systems that fit into this model. Some of the industrial design around them is really cool. So go have a look at that. Also in this small space, we have what I will call a more traditional sort of configuration. I don't want to spend too much time speaking about this, but this is basically where you have sort of two sets of machines. You have a file server, scale-up file server in a clustered configuration with a Hyper-V server in a clustered configuration, join them together and provide compute storage in that sort of configuration. We provide some guidance around that. I don't want to dive into it here, but just be aware that that's somewhere there inside of the architecture. Let's talk more about the medium size now. This is where I want to spend a little bit more time. What you'll see if you go into the reference architecture are three design patterns. And these are not mutually exclusive. They're really patterns which you'll see in different ways applying to different solutions. Though normally we will categorize a partner solution as being one of these three. I'm going to talk through more about what these are. Software-defined infrastructure used to be called in V3. It used to be called, I can't remember, it had something about solutions over SMB storage. Okay, so basically that's the difference in that solution. Then what we'll call a non-converged infrastructure and converged infrastructure. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about what those mean. But first, across all of these, you'll see a set of common requirements. How many people are familiar with the Windows Hardware Certification Program? Okay, a fair few. So if you've ever been through that program, if you're a hardware OEM, you'll know that that program sets a pretty good bar in terms of making sure hardware is designed in such a way that it's going to work well with Windows Server. Okay, so inside of the Fast Track program, that's a base requirement for us. Okay, all of the equipment in those solutions must be hardware certified, Windows hardware certified. Okay, we take that bar and we try and build on top of that then from a quality perspective. Then you'll see a bunch of other requirements throughout the architectural docs which say, you know what, you need to meet these other mandatory sort of goals. You need to have a dedicated fabric management cluster in order to separate the management from your fabric. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. We've decided to go with 10 gigabit Ethernet here. You could say, well, can I use 1 gig NICs? And yeah, you could. You probably need a lot of them. When we think about a design point here, we're talking about fairly large systems which will take on fairly large VM loads. And in our mind, sort of starting with 10 gig NICs just makes sense to us. Okay, so we build our infrastructure on top of a 10 gig network. Redundant storage, NAS, a bunch of extra stuff, and this is just a selection of some of the common requirements which will span all of these patterns regardless of the pattern. Then when you think about all of the features inside of Windows Server and inside of System Center, there is a wealth of features there. Consuming Windows Server 2012 and System Center 2012 was like drinking from a fire hose. We added on to that in terms of a set of additional features and refined versions of those features in the R2 release. And all of those capabilities get consumed into how we think about how do you build a really strong private cloud sort of architecture. Okay, so and some of those features will become really, really important, maybe even critical in some of the design approaches. And other ones will be, hey, these are capabilities with this sort of design. I can really take advantage of that and leverage that in the way I use the solution, which is all fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the three patterns quickly. The first one, which is called non-converged. Let me explain a little bit what this is. Really, I would call this sort of the traditional architecture. So this is a set of design where you have a SAN, which is connected up through a traditional sort of fiber channel connection up into your host environment. You'll have a server cluster, which is either blade or non-blade, whatever. But you have separate network and storage connectivity infrastructure. Okay? So if we drill into this, you'll see in this diagram that your SAN there is using fiber channel up through fiber channel switches, up through some HBAs, MPIV, MPIO to provide the load sharing and the failover capabilities. And then on the left-hand side, then you've got your network infrastructure going up through 10 gig switches. You'll see there's some NIC teaming in there to provide the failover. And then up through the rest of the stack. So through the parent partition, through to Hyper-V, and then how to support the virtual loads on top, including virtual fiber channel connections, all that sort of stuff to your storage. Okay, so this is one of the patterns, and I'm guessing that most people would look at this and say, yeah, I understand that pattern pretty well, okay, which is great. The second pattern which we talk about is converged, and my trouble with this wording is that converged means different things to different people. What we're specifically talking about here is where we are converging the connectivity infrastructure, the network infrastructure, so that you have shared infrastructure for both your storage and your network loads. Okay? So instead of separate fiber channel and Ethernet, you're basically using fiber channel over Ethernet to connect your SAN into the environment. Okay? Using converged network infrastructure, CNICs and stuff like that. So the drill down diagram, it's similar to the other one, but you can see very clearly here that we're talking about using common network switches to carry both loads up. And then when you go up to the further up in the stack, it's basically the same. Okay, so these, if you look across our partners who have different solutions, you'll see examples of both of these. Okay, some which are using the traditional architecture, and others which are using converged network infrastructure to connect the storage in. Both those patterns make it really easy to leverage any existing SAN investments which you have. That's not necessarily just investments in existing SANs, but also investments in your whole internal processes around how you manage your environment. If you have SANs today and you know how to manage those and you know how to do all of your operations around managing that SAN environment, then leveraging that as you go to a private cloud solution makes a lot of sense. Okay, so it helps you do that. The third pattern which we're talking about here is, it sort of fits in the middle. It's different in this way. Originally this was called storage over SMB. Okay, and this is where we want to go down a path where we say, well, what if you don't have a SAN? What if you want to use scale-out file servers? You want to use spaces, and then on top of that, you want to use Windows File Server to do that scale-out storage. You want to take advantage of leveraging low-cost storage in JBODs. You want to leverage technologies like SMB, multi-channel RDMA to give you blindingly fast access to that storage. So we've got a whole pattern around SMB. And SMB doesn't preclude the use of SANs. There are some SANs around which support SMB on the top end to connect up. And there are variations of this pattern which will support that. But primarily when we look at this pattern, we're looking at how do we go to this place where you can configure your storage stack in a software-defined way. Okay, so it's part of our shift towards software-defined everything. The drill down diagram here, thanks to my friend Jeff Woolsey, this is one he put together to sort of pull this apart and drill into it. I don't want to dive into this too deep, but you'll see over on the right-hand side here, we have you have your scale-out file cluster, a Spaces file server. On top of that, you're using 10 gig NICs with RDMA support, using SMB multi-channel and transparent failover on top of that to connect into your stack. On the left-hand side, you'll see that we have separate NICs for the network. That is because we want to team those using LBFO. And currently, LBFO and RDMA do not play nice together. Okay, but you could bring these together and use standard NICs on the other side, but you would lose the ability to use RDMA, which gives you some really, really cool performance. So we have those separated up, but you're still using common top-of-rack switches and stuff like that. And then up through the stack. So you sort of see these three different patterns. They're really storage architecture patterns in some way, how you architect your storage into your system. And the fast track architecture docs support variations of those and allow our partners to say, well, I really want to build a solution that looks like this, based on their specialty in technology. Okay. So let's move on a little bit, just keeping an eye on the time. Let's talk about fabric management. So we've talked a little bit about what some of the architectures are for the fabric itself, but then managing that infrastructure as a fabric in a cloud way, and then offering services on top of that in a service provider sort of model is something that we really want to get to. So we separate out in my minds the fabric and the fabric management. And what you want in the fabric management is the ability to take advantage of all those characteristics of the fabric and make sure that you can provide and manage the fabric to deliver on those promises. The promises like elasticity, the promises like continual availability. Okay? And on top of that, what we really need is to be able to manage that way. On top of that, we want to also provide the cloud-like model, so the multi-tenant model where it's usage-based and you offer the ability to self-service. So in concrete terms, what we're talking about here are all your favorite System Center components, okay? SC, VMM, SCOM, you list them out. And then Windows Azure Pack to provide the very top layer, where you start providing those out as a set of services in a cloud-based way. Windows Azure Pack is something which we added in v4 prior to the R2 time wave. Windows Azure Pack was not there, but this sort of completes the picture for us from a full private cloud perspective. It's recommended in v4. It's not mandatory, but we're really hoping that a lot of our partners will go that extra mile. The reason being because if you use Windows Azure Pack to provide that sort of service model on top, it really puts you on the right path towards then being able to offer a consistent story as your customers or your tenants, your organization, starts looking at, well, private cloud, plus also being able to extend into hybrid scenarios out to the public Azure cloud. Okay, so what does this mean? Let's look at the fabric management of the fabric and the System Center components. One of the things which is a mandatory requirement in the program is that the fabric management is on a dedicated cluster. So there's a couple of reasons for this. But mainly it's a case of making sure that the management doesn't interact or doesn't impact your fabric operation. Those of you who are familiar with like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, atomic, you can't measure something without impacting what you're measuring. It's sort of the same as that. Okay, you can't manage the fabric without impacting, or you don't want to manage the fabric in a way which is going to impact the operations of the fabric itself. So we split that out onto a dedicated fabric management cluster. It's configured in a HA sort of way, so you'll see a 2-node cluster or a 4-node cluster there, dedicated to running the management workload. When you get then into the, before we do that, let's just throw this up. So there's a lot of detail. The fabric management architecture guide is equally thick as the fabric guide. And it talks at a very detailed level about how to deploy all the System Center components, one in a HA way, okay? How do you split those across different tiers? How do you split them across nodes so that they work in the way that you need them to work, that they scale, and that they are continuously available? And then the guide will go on and start taking a scenario pivot on management. So it'll start saying, okay, from a deployment provisioning perspective, you've got new hardware coming in. You've got additional storage and you need to provision that. How do you do that? What's important in terms of the System Center components and their configuration, which is important to make that work? And in order to do this, what we do from the product group side is we bring in the guys who build VMM. And they say, well, listen, in this configuration, you really need to think about this, this, and this. We capture that in the architecture doc. And that's the conversation that we have with our partners when they're building these solutions. Update. How do we think about patching in this environment? Don't know if you can read it on the slide, but somewhere in there, there'll be a WSUS server to talk about how you do patching in this environment, which is our recommendation. Identity security. How do you integrate these solutions with your existing AD infrastructure? Operations reporting, SCOM. What add-ins do we need? What MOM packs do we need written in order to make this entire solution from hardware all the way up manageable by MOM, so that you can monitor it and you can manage it and report on it? Automation, same thing. How do you use Orchestrator? How do you, what runbook should you have in this environment? All of that is part of this management architecture guide. And you go through in detail, and as Michael was saying, there's going to be some mandatory stuff in there, which we say, this isn't a good solution unless you do this, this, and this. And you know what? There's some stuff which we really recommend you do. And when we have a validation conversation with our partners, it gets to sort of, well, you haven't followed this recommendation. Why not? What's your thinking there? And it allows us to both educate our partners and for our partners to educate us on our products, which is one of the dual benefits, the two-way street benefit of the program for us as a product group. Okay, let's talk about WAP quickly. So as I said, Windows Azure Pack was a new recommended component in V4 of the program. Really what we're talking about here is how do we move to an operational model where I engage with my internal divisions inside of an enterprise as if they were multi-tenants or as if they were tenants, allow them to start using and consuming resources in a usage-based way, maybe even self-service, which is why we add WAP. If you look at the Windows Azure Pack, and if you go listen to that team, from a deployment perspective, they'll talk about two different modes of deploying. The first is what they'll call this pattern around minimal deployment. And if you look at the slide, you can see that they've thought about different levels of tiering and then roles inside of that tiering. So this is, and how to deploy those in such a way that it scales and will load balance correctly across the way that you deploy that on a cluster. If you look at, let's take an example of the very top tier, which is the public-facing tier. You'll see that there's three roles identified there. There's the tenant site, there's the tenant auth site, and then there's the tenant public API. Now, in this deployment model, what they're thinking is as you scale a tier. However, that may not be really what you want to do. It may be that each of those different roles inside of that tier scale differently. So their second pattern is around scaled distributed deployment, where it actually splits that out and says, let's separate this out so you've got more granularity around how you manage the scaling of Windows Azure Pack in your environment. So this is the sort of detail which is now part of the architecture docs in Private Cloud V4. Okay, so let me wrap up. Let's summarize a little bit about what we've talked about. From the Private Cloud Fast Track perspective, from the product group perspective, this is about architecture, it's about cloud design, and it's about validating that design. It's about capturing the knowledge of the teams who build the individual components that make up a cloud. They're talking to the Windows Server Storage team, talking to the networking teams, talking to System Center VMM, talking to SCOM, talking to all of those guys, talking to the WAP team, capturing their best understanding of how their product works in a cloud environment, in a private cloud environment, okay, and capturing that as a set of architectural guidance. It's about sharing that guidance with our partners so as they build solutions for you to go buy, that they are building solutions which bring together the best of the Microsoft stack. It's about us being able to listen and work with our partners so we can understand how they want to use our products, how they want to use our technologies, so that we can build them better. And then it's about sitting down with them when they've got a solution, walking through their design with them, looking at how they work in terms of some of the tools that we have. We run, as part of the validation process, we'll run cluster validation reports. And we'll go through the results with our partners. Anything that pops up there as sort of a warning or a concern. We'll talk through it. We'll understand why that's happening. If it's a problem in the report, a false positive, whether it's something which is an area where their solution could be improved. And we'll walk through that. We'll walk through scenarios. We'll walk through things like, okay, let's walk through how live migration works in here. Let's walk through the failover scenarios. We'll have our partners go pull plugs on things so we can see that we've got redundancy in the solution. That's all part of the program from an architectural perspective and a validation perspective. That's what we're trying to do. And hopefully, as you leave today, you'll go with a sense of, wow, there's actually a fair bit of diligence that happens here. If I'm buying a private cloud fast track validated solution, all of this has happened in the background to make sure it's a great solution. We talked about the small solutions, cluster in a box, the SAFE. We talked about the different infrastructure patterns, fabric management, system center. That's what the program is about. These architectural documents are going to be available. You can see that in the reference section. There'll be links there. But right now, from this program, we've got a whole bunch of really cool partner solutions. And just in the last couple of months, we've had quite a number of partners come and go through the process of validating their solutions with V4. So I'm going to turn back to Michael so he can tell you about some of our partners.
Thank you, Ian. So this is great stuff. I think I need to get me 103 for my lab at home to play with those. So now you know what the program is about. What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to give you, and what the value is that we're trying to deliver by giving you something that we say, well, we validate that, we test this, right? And then you got the overview. Okay, what do these architectures even look like in a more detailed fashion? So let's see. Take a look at the partners that are participating in this program today. And as you can see, so we have pretty much all the major hardware or OEM partners in this program, right? So all these partners have worked with us, have validated solutions today in the market on either the version 3 or version 4 of the reference architecture. And what I wanted to do was highlight the partners that have today, available in the market today, solutions based on version 4, meaning based on Windows Server 2012 R2 and System Center 2012 R2. Okay, so we have Cisco partnering with NetApp. They have their FlexPod solution in the market today. So it's based on the converged infrastructure. Okay, so based on Cisco server and networking hardware and the NetApp storage. And they also provide, for example, speaking of the criteria again, the Windows Azure pack, as even though we say it's a recommended, it's not mandatory, they went all the way and say, okay, we include that as well. We have Fujitsu. They have 2 solutions in the market. They have a smaller one, or the cluster in a box, and the enterprise model, which falls into the medium category. Okay, so they also updated that to make sure they have a Windows Server and System Center 2012 R2 based solution in the market. Hitachi, they have a solution also, but they're phasing those in, so they have also participated and upgraded already to have that solution in the market based on their architectures. We have NEC, and NEC, so they have a small solution. That's pretty interesting. So the previous ones you saw, they were pretty big. They're enterprise focused. But the key here is, so this is not a program necessarily only interesting to large enterprise deployments. So as you can see here with NEC, as I talked earlier, the minimum requirement is a 2-node cluster, right? So this is something that also can be interesting for small and medium-sized installations. And then finally, the latest partner that entered the program, Nutanix, they validated their virtual compute platform with us within this program. So those are solutions available today in the market within the Private Cloud Fast Track v4 reference architecture program. And by the way, all these partners, please, they down on the show floor, go find their booth. You can check the solutions out right there in person, talk to the people in more detail about their particular products. So again, why Private Cloud Fast Track? It's about time to value. How can we help you get the solution or get your private cloud up faster? Don't spend months in picking all these pieces and all these components, but how can we help you to get there faster, within weeks, maybe? Reduce the risk when you go there. Yes, you are picking all these components. How can you make sure, well, this works at the end of the day? So we take this out. And one thing, I didn't mention that before, but these architectures, the reference architecture guides, they're not put together basically on theory only. Okay, so those are experiences and best practices from our field, from our consulting organization that have the experience in building these solutions for our customers, and they went then ahead and built that IP, and we are sharing that with you. So this is proven in the field with existing installations. And again, the flexibility. So if you have a partnership with a certain OEM partner, with a certain hardware vendor, you can leverage that. As you saw, all the major partners, they are in the program today. We're working with them to bring you these solutions. So some references here, some links, so you can download these guides, okay, and go through them and look at them. We also put some interesting further reading on the program and in general about our thoughts on the private cloud in the material. So when you download the slides later, so you have all those links, or take a photo. Okay, so typically, so I did mention it in the beginning, so I thought, well, let's have a surprise. So this is the part where the written test comes in. So Ian will now go around and hand out the forms. There's about 25 questions, okay? No, just kidding. So that was basically to give you an overview about the program. What are we doing to help you get your private cloud, your on-premise solution up and running fast and easy, okay? So with that, do we have any, there's some time left, so you can either have, I don't know what they're serving now, pretzels or coffee at least. Do we have any questions? Yes? Can
Okay,
you do a small pilot?
So the question was, please correct me if I get this, if I don't get this accurate. The question was, hey, there's a set of validation which we do against the physical solution, but do we do any validation from a virtual only perspective in virtual environments?
If you did a validation, that'd be great, but I'm sure that a lot of the testing might have been done in a virtual environment to begin with.
So what we do with our partners is we work, yes, through the physical side of the configuration. We review their physical architecture. We look at the way they've architected and designed their physical solutions. And you need to remember that our partners are putting to market physical racks, right, solutions. In the validation process, we definitely cover virtual scenarios. So scenarios in the tenant workloads, okay? So how does that fail over? How does the guest clustering work, for example, okay? And how do you make sure that we've got the right management configuration to support those scenarios? I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, or whether you're asking whether we can test run all of the same validation in a purely virtual environment. It's like, you know, can you test Hyper-V running in a guest VM? No, you can't today, right? So it's a little bit hard there. Does that sort of answer your question? If not, let's talk afterwards. Okay.
Anybody else?
Just while we're taking Q&A, we might just slide through the other slides,
Yeah.
the mandatory slides, so you can.
Where is it available? Yes, it was on the previous slide I put up. So when you go and download the slides from the session, you have all the links to the architecture document.
So the first 4 links
Yeah.
here basically capture the 3 different docs, which is the Fabric Management Guide, the Fabric Architecture Guide, and the Deployment Guide. And then you can download those as a consolidated set. Then the other thing is when our partners publish their solutions, they will have their deployment guide, which usually is as part of their solution, which usually is built on top of the deployment guide that comes as part of the program. They will add the specifics about their solution into that deployment guide and make that available as part of the solution.
Okay.
Just while people are reading, I'd encourage you please to do a session eval for us. That helps us understand where this session landed, particularly there. Can you answer the questions about the level? As we've done this session over the last couple of tech eds, we've moved from sort of level 300 to level 200 and back and forth. Really would like to hear your opinion as to where we should target this based on what you were expecting to get out of the session. That would be awesome.
Any other questions? Up there. Thank you.
So I'll take that. The question is, where does Orchestrator fit into here? It fits right in the middle of that whole fabric management head. So when you look at the system center components you need to be able to manage this as a fabric, then Orchestrator and the ability to automate your environment and create the right runbooks and so forth, that pretty much lives exactly in there. Yeah, absolutely. So when I had that slide of this is the way the system center components are deployed, pretty sure Orchestrator was somewhere in that slide. I know it was really hard to read, but yeah, absolutely. And as you go through the Fabric Management Guide, it'll talk about Orchestrator and how to leverage that.
Anybody else? Oh.
Yeah? So the question is, do we have partners who are doing the scale-out file server version of the pattern? Absolutely. Yeah, we do. In fact, Nutanix have a solution that fits into that pattern. They're actually not using the Windows Server stack there, but they have their own proprietary stack. But it fits clearly in that pattern, and that's fantastic, right? Because that's a solution built on top of the Microsoft technologies in general, and System Center and so forth, and we love that. And yeah, they're a great partner. Yes. So the question is, for a bare bones solution, do you really need System Center, or can you just get by with Windows Server and the hardware components? Look, this is the way I think about it. Like I said, you have Fabric just with Windows Server. Okay, the technologies in Windows Server will give you Fabric. But what you don't really have is the way to manage it and operate it as a Fabric. Okay, you still at that point just have the ability to operate it as a cluster environment with some clustered storage and highly available storage, but you don't actually get to then slice and dice that in a way that allows you to actually think about it in a fabric abstraction. You really need Virtual Machine Manager to start providing some of those cloud abstractions on top of it. So I think I would answer no to your question based on that. Okay, that you don't really have a cloud environment until you start managing it as a cloud, both in the way you operate the fabric, okay, and maintain that and support the SLAs that you want to build on top of that. And I would now say sort of until you start operating as a service provider internally inside of your company, you're not really operating as a private cloud, in my opinion. Hope that answers your question. Any final questions? If not, thank you very much. We'll hang around if you have any private questions you want to come up and chat to us about. Oh, one final.
Yeah. Right there.
If you scan this code, that'll get you into the eval, okay? And what you can do is you can win the Xbox. That's what the Xbox is there for.
They can win, not we.
We can't win it.
No, we don't.
No.
Okay. Damn it.
No. If it was a case of the presenters with the best evaluation scores win the Xbox, we would be bribing you and all sorts of stuff, I'm sure. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you got something useful out of this session. And enjoy the rest of your Tech Ed.
All right, so let's get started. Welcome to Private Cloud Made Simple, or the ultimate session about the Private Cloud Reference Architecture program at Microsoft. My name is Michael Schulz. I'm a product marketing manager in the Cloud and Enterprise organization. And my partner in crime today is Ian Lucas, principal program manager, also in Cloud and Enterprise. So before I start, I would like to get a good idea of who am I talking to. So who has deployed a private cloud today successfully in their enterprise? Oh, quite a few, fair enough. Who's interested in doing that and also deploying that or taking it further into a hybrid environment? Very good. Do we have any system integrators here? No system integrators. Oh, well, okay. Quite a few at least. And the most important question of all, who are the most awesome guitar players and drummers for tonight's jam session? Perfect. So we will have some fun. That's great. So before we start, let me talk about a little bit about the Microsoft Cloud OS vision and what we mean when we talk about cloud. So there are basically three pillars to that vision. So we start with the private cloud. Yes, and some of you have deployed it already. So it starts Windows Server, System Center. When we say private cloud, and a lot of people oftentimes say, well, I have virtualization. So I have cloud, right? It's the same. And it's not. It's really not. Virtualization is great. It became quite popular back in the day. Server consolidation. People had the problem, well, they had servers galore. And then they ran into these problems. Well, I don't have the space anymore. I don't have power, and cooling costs me an arm and a leg. So what do I do? And they start to virtualize, and that's great. That's for virtualization or server consolidation. It's a great tool, but it's not really cloud. It's when we talk about cloud, what we really mean is delivering services, not just a VM. Because if you think about it, virtualization is, yes, you virtualize a physical machine, but at the end of the day, you still have a server instance. They are customers. And where that really helps is, for example, if you are in another country than, in this case, Microsoft. Let's say, so I'm from Germany. And if you're in Germany, you say, well, I need to make sure, yes, I want a cloud service delivered, but I need to make sure that my data, my service is on German soils. I have to deal with a German entity, with a German company for whatever the reason may be it regulatory, be it other reasons. I want to make sure that I have that in my country. Or this service provider can deliver me a more customized service that I want. Different SLAs that, for example, would not be possible in a public cloud. So we have those partners as well. And the key here is that across these three pillars, across these three tenets, what we want to make sure is that we deliver you one consistent platform. Okay? So it's based on Windows Server, System Center. And we give you something else. We give you, who has heard, I hope all of you by now, about the Windows Azure Pack? There could be more hands. Okay. So if not, that's really something you want to check out, because what that allows you or gives you then for your on-premise private cloud and for the service provider cloud, it gives you the same interface, the same environment that your users expect or see in Microsoft Azure. So you have the consistency across these three pillars. But we go beyond that, right? So development, we give you Visual Studio so that you have the development environment right there where you can develop the application, deploy it directly into the cloud. Management with System Center, again, a consistent and unified platform. The same interface to manage your services on the private cloud or, for example, in the Azure cloud. Data, a SQL Server, you can spin that up in a VM in your cloud or deliver it as a service. So Azure Pack gives you the ability so that you have a portal and at the back end it has the providers that in the back end you stand up a SQL Server farm, and then if you have a server entity that you have to deal with, that you have to administer. And what we really want to do is take that to the next level where you can say, well, I just want to deliver a service. Have a user come to you or a business unit and say, well, I need SharePoint, I need a SQL database. And, well, not even have to come to you, but do that for themselves, let's say through a portal, right? And so when we talk about cloud, what we mean is, our cloud is requestable, it's repeatable, it's available, obviously, that's a key part. It's chargeable, so that when we think about it, how can you, if you deliver that inside your organization to that business unit, when they say, well, we need this service, how can you make sure that you have proper reporting in place, for example, to charge them for the capacity they consume? And we have the public cloud. You know, we have software as a service with Office 365. Any Office 365 users here? Quite a few, right? Public platform as a service with Microsoft Azure that we deliver there. Then obviously infrastructure as a service through virtual machines in Microsoft Azure. So you can still spin up a VM there and move that workload into the public cloud. So when we talk about the private cloud, what it really is about control, right? It's about on-premise, behind your firewall, you have the control of the environment. When we talk about the public cloud, what it really is about scale. Yes, you can spin up that VM, and you can spin it up, let's say, in a data center here on the West Coast in the US, or you can spin it up in a data center in Europe, in Asia, Africa, or you can even move it around, right? So it's about scale. If you have the need to scale a service, for example, around the globe, that's where the public cloud really comes in, where you really have a benefit from that. And then we have the service providers. So we work with a lot of service providers that are offering the same architecture, the same platform to your users. The business unit, I don't know, sales, they require another database. Their developers can just go to that portal, request a database based on their requirements, and IT doesn't have to deal with that anymore. They don't have to go and find a machine or spin up a VM and deploy SQL Server. Identity. Active Directory, probably the most used directory service in the enterprise today. So spans also all these clouds. And finally, virtualization. It's a tenet of the cloud, of course, but not the only thing. The other thing when we talk to customers, and there's this difference between the on-premise cloud and the public cloud. And there are two types. There are enterprises that are acting as service providers, and then there are those that don't know yet that they want to. So what that means is basically they say, well, I want all these. I want to deliver this service. I want to have this elasticity. I want to have this chargeback or showback. But I'm not a service provider. I guess you are. Just that you are a service provider to your internal users, to your internal entities, not to the world, but within your enterprise. But the concept starts to become the same. You are delivering a service when you think about the private cloud. Okay? That's really where this helps, that then users can self-service themselves with the required service they need. So some common questions that we hear are, how can I get a private cloud deployed quickly? How can I save time doing so? How can I reduce risk when going down that path of going, I want that cloud? Anybody wants to do that themselves? Yes? No? Okay. and also how to leverage. If you have a partner, a strategic relationship, for example, with a certain hardware partner, and insert your favorite hardware partner here, then how can you leverage that? Is that possible? So that's what we came up with this program, Private Cloud Fast Track, the reference architecture program, where Microsoft partners with OEM partners to build, not only define a reference architecture, but then based on that, build integrated solutions, software and hardware combined, and hardware being compute, networking, and storage. Okay, so that you have the best of both worlds. So in terms of, what's the right solution? Again, there are those who want to do it all themselves. Pick the network controllers, the HBA, storage, which server to use, and figure that all out and do it from scratch. Great. Problem is, it can take a long time, and there's no pre-integration. There's a high level of customization, of course, but it may not be that necessary anymore. Then there is the other end, using a service provider. But that's something we also say, maybe I want that on-premise. I do not want that in the cloud. So there's a middle ground, if you so, right? And that's the private cloud fast track solutions. So we can take out that hassle. And that's really where we put a lot of effort in, both Microsoft and our hardware partners, because we want to make sure that when you go down that path of deploying that private cloud on-premise, we'll make sure that, the customer or the user experience is as positive as possible. That we make sure we pre-tested, we validated the solution, that it really works. So we take a lot of the guesswork, a lot of the research and experimenting out, so that we can say, this solution, this hardware stack, together with the various Microsoft software components, we Microsoft, we tested that, okay? And we can guarantee it works. We validated it. And it comes down to then the time to value is a term we often hear these days. Is how quick can I turn this around? I have a project. I have this project cycle. I need to get this up quick. How soon can you do that? And then again, the flexibility in working with these various partners. So faster deployment, reducing the risk, and also